Hello, everybody. When I landed in Paris, I went straight to the hotel, and I tried to do the check-in in the hotel as normally, and they just couldn't find my name. So I was like, okay, maybe check this other name. And they were like, nope, you can't get in. And so I waited for a while, and then after a while, someone checked from a list and stuff. And then it turns out they had misspelled my name. They wrote Staltz Andrew. So hi, my name is Salty Andrew. And as you've heard, I built a framework called Rxjs, which is a completely different framework. So I'm quite honored to be invited here for Angular Conf. Yes, sorry. Sorry. Okay. I also am a core contributor to Rxjs, so I wrote some documentation, some bug fixes and tests. And so it means that some of the code that's running now in Angular 2 is my fault. I mean, my contribution. And in this talk, we're going to see Rxjs, the basics. Raise your hand if you feel like raising your hand for no good reason. That's a lot of people, quite impressive. So this is not a talk where you know, like, why should you use Rxjs. This is just a talk where we build Rxjs from scratch. And you're going to see that, this is not scary at all, actually. It's pretty straightforward, and we're going to see in a couple of lines of code. So it's all about getting any kind of callback in JavaScript and representing that as a collection. And then you can sort of operate on that collection kind of as you can with Lodash collections, let's say, with arrays or objects. So you have map and filter. And that's it. That's Rxjs. So it's all about callbacks. Let's talk a little bit about callbacks. This is just a basic example. I suppose that size is OK. Yes? No? No? OK. So we just have an element on the DOM, and you can register a callback or an event listener so that this function runs whenever we click. OK, that's one type of callback. Another type of callback in JavaScript, we have arrays, right? So here we have an array of numbers, like that, and then you can do for each, so you register a callback to run for each item in the array. Okay, then it just runs, console log 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. We can actually see that running. It's just basic stuff. It says before 10, 20, 30, 50, 60, and after. So that means that this callback ran synchronously. Okay, so callbacks are not just asynchronous programming. Okay, let's settle that they can be synchronous or they can be asynchronous. What other kind of callbacks do we have in JavaScript? There are promises. So here's the fetch with some URL. And there we get a response promise. And now we can register 2 callbacks, not just one. We have also for failures, when something bad happens, then we have a callback for that as well. So this is new because you don't have an error for clicks, right? You can't just like fail to click. Oh, like I broke my finger. Like that doesn't happen. So, but with promises and HTTP, you can have an error. So that's why we have a callback for errors. And going a bit further in Node.js, like you have Node.js streams, and there you register 3 callbacks. For data, I got a new chunk of data. For errors, if something bad happens, and for done. Why do we need the done in this case? Is that when you're receiving data, you don't actually know how many chunks are you going to get. So at some point, you need to have some indication of like, I'm done. Okay? So we have all of these cases. And so what if we try to make the most generic API for all kinds of callbacks in JavaScript? We're going to have these 3 callbacks. Okay? So it would look something like this, where you have the next callback, the error callback, and the complete callback. In the case of, let's say, basic clicks, we're just going to use this one, right? You're going to do, you're going to get that click. This data is a click event. And you're not going to use the others, so we can actually implement that just quickly. We have this function called give me some data. And in this case, I have clicks. That's my data. And then I have 3 callbacks there. CP, complete CB, and I'm just gonna use the next CB. I'm not gonna use the error and the complete. So on the document, we're going to add an event listener for clicks, next CB. Okay, that's silly, right? But what if I would have here, instead of a click listener, I would have a fetch, right, for some URL. Then I would use the next CB and also the error CB. And then I would have to handle those errors somehow. Here I'm just going to do a console log. But if you would have, like, let's say, Node.js streams, then they would call the complete callback. I would also have to handle those here somehow. Okay, so this API, as you can see, like, it handles all kinds of callbacks. And it also handles, let's say, arrays. So I can do a for each on this array and call the next CB, right? I'm going to actually run that. 06, and it says 10, 20, 30, okay? What did I just do there? I just called this function, and that ran this, and it delivered all those values in the next CB. Now, why is this called give me some data? So that sometimes, well, when you call a function, you just want to get data out of it, like that. Let's say this is like the typical case. But if it comes asynchronously, then you need callbacks. So we are just saying that give me some data, and please deliver the results, or the data, to these callbacks, okay? And then kind of things work. I'm going to do one more trick, okay? And that is, I'm going to, instead of passing 3 callbacks, I'm going to just pass one object to this function. I'm going to create that object. I'm going to call it an observer. And this is just going to bundle all of those 3 callbacks in one object. Nothing special. Complete. Like that. So also going to move this down here. So then I say, give me some data and deliver the results on this observer. Okay? And then once I get that observer object, I just call next. Okay. And this still works, I promise you. It's still working. Oh, and by the way, since we're delivering 10, 20, 30, and we know that the array is not going to emit anything else, I can just do observer.complete. Okay, so it says, hey, I get 10, 20, 30, and I am done. Okay? Okay, so why did I do that? So I can just bundle the 3 callbacks in one object. I'm going to do also yet another trick where I'm going to rename this give me some data to subscribe. It's just a name, okay? Subscribe means what? What? Okay, can drink some water. It's just a name, and it means give me data. That's it. So I'm going to do one more trick. Many tricks today, but anyway. I'm going to put that function in an object, okay? Just putting it in an object. And you see the object has one property, and that's a subscribe, and it's a function. So then down here I can say observable dot subscribe. Okay, why did I do that? Well, we have this observer object, and it's observing something, right? So that something is observable. Ta-da! Yeah. So nothing special. And by the way, like, since I'm wrapping this array inside this object with a function, I'm just going to call this an Array Observable. Okay, so then I could also have, for instance, a click observable, and this would do something else. It would, like, register an event listener, and it would call observer.next. Okay, so I can have all kinds of observables. So I could also make a helper function here just to make things a bit easier to create. I'm going to make this helper function called create observable, which takes a subscribe function, and it returns an object. Okay, just returns an object. And that object, as we know, it has subscribe. I mean, this is a very silly function. It's super normal. And then I can save a little bit of lines of code here by just passing that. See, I saved like 1 or 2 lines of code. Like this. Oh. Yep. So I just saved like a few lines of code. Okay, so what did I gain with all of this? You know, this array observable was getting, we do give me data from this array observable, deliver it on the observer, and you get stuff like that. But okay, we had this array there, and we know that arrays have nice stuff such as map, okay? So you can do 10, 20, 30 is array A, and then you can do array B is A map, get each of those X and divide them by 10. So A is 10, 20, 30, and B is another array where each item is divided by 10, okay? It's important to know. So with observables, we kind of lost that because now, you know, whoa, go away, yeah. Now we can't really do that, right? If we try to do that, what happens? It says map is not a function on array observable. Well, that's okay because array observable was an object that only had subscribe. So it would be nice if we had here map, right? So we could do that. So let's just build that as well. Map, as we know, is a function that takes a transform function as argument. In our case, that was the x divided by 10, right? And we know that this should return some output observable. Kind of like arrays do, you know, they return an output observable or array that is completely different to the input array. And we also know that we have, well, we have that one, and we have an input observable. And what is this one? It's the this keyword, because the map function is attached to this object, okay? So when you say this keyword for that function, it knows that the owner object is that object there. So this keyword is the input observable. And in the case of this code that we're running down here, this keyword is the array observable. So that's our input observable, okay? So how do we create an output observable? It's right here, right? Create observable. So gladly we have that helper function there, and that takes a subscribe function as an input. And here we're going to deliver data to the output observer, okay? Okay, so remember that subscribe means give me data, but we just call it subscribe. So when I say output observable, give me data, well, where does that data come from? It comes from the input observable. So I also need to do give me data from the input observable, and then I need those 3 callbacks, right? Okay. So when I get data from the input, I first want to transform that data. So I do transform function, transform, yeah. Okay, transform function on that input data, I get this y. So if x was 10, then y is 1, because it's divided by 10. And then I just pass that to the output observer. Here you go. And if something bad happens on the input, I'm just going to say, well, an error happened on the input. I'm just going to pass that error to the output. And if it's done, then I can also make the output be done. Okay. And that's it. So this map function is attached to this object, which is an observable. And then now this will return a new observable, right? And we can subscribe to that. Let's see if this works. Oh, it does. So 1, 2, 3, and done. Okay, that's nice. Okay, so now our observables are like able to do a bit more than what we could before, but we also would like to have filters. So we say, you know, the number 2 is bad. I don't like the number 2. So we want only numbers that are not 2. And arrays have that, so we could build that as well, right? We're going to make the filter function. And here's a condition function. And then whenever we get data from the input, we want to check, does it pass our condition? Okay? Does it return true when I pass it x? And if it does, then I'm going to just pass it to the output observer because it passed the condition. But if it doesn't pass that condition, then I'm just not going to do anything. Okay? Just didn't pass. And in case of error happens, the filter is just going to error as well. Okay, we need to attach that filter function to this here, like that. And that should work as well. Okay, no more number 2s. We get 1, 3, and done. Now, here's an interesting question, okay? What happens if I comment out this part? So there's no more subscribe. Let's see what happens. Well, I didn't save. Yeah, saved. Saved the file. Laughing. Nothing happens. Nothing happens. And what's quite interesting is that what if we put here like some console log, hi, and let's see if that one runs, right? Well, no, it doesn't run. So what's going on? Okay, what is the array observable? It's an object, right? When we call map, what does it do? It returns output observable. What's that? An object, right? And when we call filter, what does it do? Return an object. So all that we did was get an object, create another object, create another object. Nothing happened so far with those. They're just objects, and each one of those contains methods, but they don't do anything. So it's only when we say subscribe, which means, yo, give me data, right? Remember that, it's important. This is actually super important for the knowledge of hot and cold observables, so I'm not like super joking. But anyway, once you subscribe to this part here, okay? Let's take a look. How was subscribe on the filter? So filter, as you see, returns this thing, and this is the subscribe function that we're calling down there. This is literally the same function. So then this will run, and this code inside here will run. So that means that this part will run, this input observable.subscribe, and what is that? It was the map. So if you check, this is that function, and this runs. Okay, so what is this input observable.subscribe? This was the array. And if you check what that was, it was this code inside here, this subscribe, and then it finally says, okay, here are your values. So it goes observer.next, here's your value, and that function is literally this same function. It transforms that x, spits it out to the output observer, which in this case is this function for the filter, checks if the condition passes, and passes that to the output observer. And that one is exactly this one here, which is the final one. And that's how it works. It goes upwards, like subscribe, transform data, filter data, pass it back. Okay, there's always like this up and down happening. Oh, that's cool. But we just recreated array, map, and filter, right? What's the point of that? Well, what we didn't have before was this. We can do click observable, right? We already had that over there. And then we can map it. We know that it has click events, so we can do event.clientX. That returns an X number. And then we can say, I only like X numbers that are less than 200. Okay, so if I get this code and I put it in the browser over here, and then if I click over here, you see those numbers are emitted. That's cool. So the map and filter and all these sort of helper functions that we had from arrays, now they suddenly work with clicks, because both arrays and clicks and promises and streams, all of them work with callbacks. So an observable is just a way of getting any callback looking thing and making that be a collection, and then you can use map and filter and etc. and a bunch of nice stuff. And as you know, there's not just map and filter, but there's 120 other operators, which is very nice. Well, to some extent, some definitions of nice. So we also have some cool stuff like delay. You don't have array.delay, but we can build delay right now. It's pretty simple. It's like this. Oh, and the way that we would use it is that we just say dot delay by 2 seconds, okay? 2,000 milliseconds. So how do we do that? Well, we know that when we get data from the input, we don't want to send it immediately. We want to wait for 2 seconds, right? So we know that we get this amount of time there, and we're just going to wait for that amount of time, which was how much period? And then we're going to run this, which is what? Give the data to the output after that much time has passed. Okay? So now let me try running this in the browser. That. Click, 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 click. And it comes delayed. That's cool. If I click here, nothing happens because it's too large number. I need to click over here. Okay. Kind of works. So that is cool. And if you check, that's Rxjs. So there you go. You import Rxjs, and it actually also has .create, which is very similar to create observable, as we just saw before. And here, this function in particular is a way of wrapping an array in an observable. And then you have filter and map and like delay and all these crazy stuff, right? And that's basically the idea, okay? It is very important to know what it does under the hood, like going up the subscribe chain, passing down the values. It's very important to know that subscribe is just give me data. And if you don't call subscribe, nothing's going to happen. Those are like core ideas that explain a bunch of bugs that people find sometimes. And I see actually daily, on Stack Overflow, I see daily like Rxjs questions coming in. So if you just understand these basics, you're not going to trip over stuff that often, actually. Of course, you're supposed to learn Rxjs in this talk. That's kind of impossible. But this is like super important part. And if you want to learn more, we didn't cover subscription. We didn't cover subjects and schedulers and most of the big operators. But there's a lot of learning material, like on the documentation site itself. I wrote a lot of the manuals, so I know what's there. And you can also check Egghead. So if you go to egghead.io, we have a ton of courses there about Rxjs, and it sort of explains things in detail. So there's a ton of learning resources, and if you want to know how to continue from this, well, I recommend the documentation site and Egghead. So yeah, I hope you learned something from this, and thank you very much for listening.